Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Furidashi podcast, and to this, the Year of Metal Gear, sponsored by Salty Nuts. That's one for Lauryn. And for all of you heads out there who have been listening in on our conversations prior to the broadcast, today we are going to be talking about Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty, also known as, tactical espionage game Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty HD Edition, which is what we actually played. I should
what a long title. Sorry, they're gonna hear my laugh, and I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. It's just a brilliantly long title. Just it really tells you everything you need to know about the game. Truly, it is tactical. It is an action. It is an espionage. It is a Metal Gear 2 sequel. Tactical but really, truly, is it maybe more about Liberty of the Sons or Sons of Liberty? Who is to say?
Or patriots, or any of the other weird dudes who are introduced in this game. There's plenty of
so
weird
many
dudes. Yeah.
I mean, I was a dude. I'm a dude. I played this game when I was like 12. I was definitely like, this totally took me back to 12-year-old Lauryn, playing my PlayStation 1/PlayStation 2, whatever genre that was. Generation.
Well, no, but that's the thing, is because you are amongst the women folk. This game was specifically designed for you. And if everyone out there wants to know why that is, well, you're going to have to sign up for our Patreon at patreon.com/Furidashi, because in this month's Patreon episode, we will actually be discussing the original design document for this game. Quite the rarity. You don't normally get things like that for, massive mainstream AAA games. So that's going to be a real treat. But you gotta pay for it. It is a real
treat. And you gotta come behind the wall with us, all our soldiers, all our snakes out there.
Yeah.
It'll be really interesting. My joke was that you rarely get a game design document in AAA nowadays.
Ayo. Ayo. All right. As you can tell, Lauryn and I are a little punchy because we're both extremely tired. Lauryn because she is a world traveler. Me because I am a country traveler. And we have both very recently gotten back from trips. We have also had difficult times with our working lives. And so, we're probably going to be a little loopy. But that's going to be great because this game is a little loopy. So, Metal Gear Solid 2, where are we? Where are we in the history of games? So, the PlayStation 2, literally the best-selling console ever in the history of consoles, is now on the scene. And it is sort of leaps and bounds above the previous technology of the PlayStation 1. So we're now actually sort of like in an era that is kind of like a mini golden age for games.
It is a mini golden age. What's funny is that I was born into a generation that did have not the PS2 in their lives, but I was also young enough that my parents bought the PS2 as my first console. So that was actually my first console growing up, everyone. And that was really fun, at least in my house is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And like every good woman gamer, I stuffed it in my bright white dresser with like wooden, it was completely wooden, and I just let it run for like 10 to 14 hours in a wooden box, like every healthy
that sounds like a really good way to treat your electronics, Lauryn.
Oh, I was really smart as a kid, yeah. And then when I discovered wood burns, I was like, this machine is getting kind of hot. But thankfully, I bought a Sony and not an Xbox. Okay.
Hey. So yeah.
Anyway, more on the history of games.
Yeah, the PlayStation 2 actually had incredible longevity as a console. And in fact, so much so that they even continued production for it well after the PlayStation 3 had already been released. I think it was actually in production for another 6 or 7 years.
It was actually. And yeah, my uncle, who is older than me and gave me the Sega Genesis as my second console, I'm a weird one.
Yeah.
Because he was offloading it, bought a new PS2 the PS2 Slim, after I had already had a PS3.
Yeah. Yeah, so like this is a crazy system. It's really impossible to overstate how important this console was for the history of video games, and due in no small part to its massive game library. In fact, that's one of the reasons why it stuck around for so long, is because it had such a huge game library. And one of the games that was not necessarily like a flagship game for the PS2, but definitely one of like the hot ones that everyone was anticipating, was the sequel to Metal Gear Solid, that is today's subject, Metal Gear Solid 2, which seeks to answer the question, what if The Matrix were about the founding fathers of the United States of America? Because it is a weird-ass game in a lot of ways. And I have to sort of note on, at the top here, I did not find this to be an enjoyable experience. However, at the same time, I'm going to attempt to be critical without being just like, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, which is my natural tendency. And hopefully Lauryn will be able to sort of like keep me in check as we go along.
I definitely will, because I think that a really wise friend of mine made me watch this really old Carpenter movie called Escape from New York.
Escape from New York.
Escape to New York.
No, Escape from New York.
It is from.
You had it right the first time.
Thank you. I had it right the first time. Escape from New York. And as I was playing this game, I got so many similar vibes to that entire plot line, which then I think served me well as a critic of games and also as the player, because then I started to kind of see through that very loopy, matrixy coded dialogue experience. And so on the one hand, I too found elements of this game that were just unplayable for me. And I am a very well-versed gamer, even of kind of older titles. Before we talked, I talked about how I loved GoldenEye 007. I don't know if that's the full title, but that's how I remember it.
I think it's GoldenEye 007 is the
I think it's GoldenEye,
title.
yeah. And I played all of the old games. I've even played the first Deus Ex, which is also
that is a janky-ass game.
It is a janky-ass game. And there are elements of that game, I think, that were easier for me to play than this game. And this game was for the PS2. There's some difference between console and PC, like totally get it, guys, and difference between PS1 and PS2. Or the Nintendo and PS2 controls. But what I'm trying to say here is that I'm definitely going to keep Nicholas in check, and he's also going to keep me in check, because while, Nicholas was a little bit more mechanically savvy with the game and I was mechanically not, I definitely think in an interesting case, I could see through some of the elements of the loopy story and the aesthetics, particularly around things we'll get into later, that, for Nicholas were just very heavy-handed and trite, but then also all over the place. And so I think this will be a really nice balance for you guys in this kind of a little bit of a shorter episode, because quite frankly, it is just a very interesting experience to play.
Yeah, because otherwise I would probably just rant for the remaining 15 plus minutes.
Oh, and I'm super loopy right now, so I would definitely just we would just kind of rant in circles. And as much as we would enjoy for you guys to listen to a podcast about a game that also loops in circles, you probably don't want to re-experience that, and we'd rather you just go back and play the edition that has been released for the PlayStation 5 for Metal Gear 2.
Metal Gear Solid 2.
Metal Gear Solid 2, thank you. I was I'm missing a word. Anyway, as you can see, our dialogue is iffy. So, Nicholas, why don't you go ahead, though, and talk about, since this was so important for the history of games, this is one of the launch titles for the PS2. I'm remembering that correctly,
I don't know if it was a launch title per se. It was definitely a marquee title for the PS2, but I don't think it was a launch title.
Okay, then maybe that's totally fine. I'm misremembering things as well. So it was a marquee title. Regardless, it's super highly anticipated.
Yeah.
Right?
And to this
day, I think people still really love it.
Yeah, it has an extremely high Metacritic Metacritic score. Like, it is a beloved game, which sort of like definitely made me feel like I was being gaslit as I was playing it, because I definitely had a hard time trying to figure out like what exactly was it that people were latching onto. And so to give a little structure to the discussion that's coming up and sort of like keep me in check, something that we normally do in our Patreon episodes is we have sort of like a 6-factor analysis of the game that, since in our actual Patreon episode this month, we're going to be doing something different, I thought it would be a good idea to sort of like bring that 6-factor analysis forward. So for those of you who have never listened to one of our Patreon episodes, there are 6 axes that we use to analyze these games. This is not the order that we usually use, but it's the order in the show notes now. And they are combat, cinema, lore, camp, psychodrama, and dudes rock / misogyny, depending on how it gets presented in the game in question. And in this particular case, we're going to be focusing less on the misogyny and more on the dudes rock aspect of it. But I want to begin with combat, because this game introduces a lot of combat mechanics. And I think there's 2 ways you can look at it. If you wanted to look at it from the critical perspective, which is the one I tend to gravitate towards, there is a tendency in this game to sort of like introduce a mechanic for a one-off purpose and then sort of dispose of it. And sort of like the most obvious example I can think of is the one that actually comes very near the end of the game, where all of a sudden you're given a sword, a katana. You are introduced to nearly an entire new combat system, because there already is a form of melee combat in the game. And it's like, here's a sword. Here is a different kind of melee combat that works entirely differently, just like on the sticks. And you're going to use this for the boss fight and probably nothing else. So you do actually have to figure it out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Keep going.
And to me, that's kind of emblematic of a problem that you see recurring throughout. Like, you know, there's like the Stinger missiles, and yeah, they're used to fight the Harrier. They're also used later in the game to fight the Metal Gear Rays, you know, the tons of them that you have to fight while standing on that platform. And then not really at all. It's like there is this weird way in which combat mechanics have this sort of like bespoke quality to them. It's like you have to use this combat mechanic for this encounter, maybe one other encounter, but not ever again. The only combat mechanic that is somewhat ubiquitous is the M9, which is what you use to sort of like knock out guys from a distance using like tranquilizer darts in your gun. Like that's the only one that you really use throughout the game.
And I think something that was frustrating for me as well was that I kind of wanted to use the M9 as like the mechanic for the entire game.
Yeah.
Like I almost really bought into this kind of simulation aspect of the game where I was like, oh, do I actually have choice in this game where I can like potentially do like a mercy run? And I knew that wasn't actually true, if that makes any sense. Like I, in my heart / head as a game developer / we're looking at this kind of in hindsight, right? Knew that wasn't the case, but damn, I really wanted that to be the case. I was like, what a fantastic way to demonstrate something that's almost like an immersive sim. And I bring up Deus Ex for a reason, because I really feel like this is a game where, to your point, Nicholas, about the combat mechanics and how they're just throwing things out you kind of throughout it, is that every time they threw in like a new mechanic, it almost seemed to kind of separate itself and divorce itself from my like player choice and what I wanted to do. Whereas I feel like in future Kojima titles, he kind of goes into a more immersive sim sort of kind of theory practical space where the players actually has a little bit more freedom. And I really love that we're talking about combat first too, because they threw in so many different things into your toolkit that you do have this sense of, I can do whatever I want. Well, but then when it comes to the boss fights, and I actually did not get all the way to the katana fight, so I'm actually very grateful, and then I can talk about my combat experience after this point, Nicholas. But I would say that, like, while I feel like our toolkit was the most expansive it has ever been, it almost felt like every boss and or level actually had a dominant strategy in order to get through it, which kind of mirrors the lack of...
Yeah, not just a
continue.
dominant strategy, but also like the game is sort of like going out of its way to tell you to do each fight in a particular way, which is actually not like the other Metal Gear games that we've played. You know, even if you go back to sort of like the ones for the MSX, like Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2, like, yeah, there was clearly an optimal strategy, but the game didn't necessarily like explicitly come out and say like, oh, your fight, oh, you know, you didn't suddenly get a radio message like, oh, this is the Running Man, he will run in a fixed pattern, you should lay down mines in his path and that will kill him. Whereas things like that actually do happen in this game. It's like, oh, this is the Fat Man, he is going to put down bombs, you should freeze the bombs. Like, I don't understand what the point of that is, for the game to like literally impose this like ever shifting mode of gameplay onto you, where it's like, okay, actually, here's a question for you, Lauryn. So going back to sort of like the M9 question and like your statement that you wish that sort of like it had been more robust throughout the entire game. So did you know that there's actually like an entire takedown system that's entirely melee based?
I did not know there was an entire takeout system that was entirely melee based.
Because you don't need to know. And that's what I mean, is that there's so much that's like totally superfluous, like actually superfluous.
Okay, but I would actually argue, so like to keep it critical, right? To kind of keep it back, is that I would actually argue, I'm actually really happy to hear you say that there is an entire melee takedown system that I didn't know about, not because it's superfluous, but because I think in the way you are arguing about how the game is telling you explicitly in this for Metal Gear versus previous games didn't tell you explicitly is kind of like what I would call in game development circles of the you over-index on one solution, not realizing that you did have a good solution to start with, it just needed to be improved. And what I mean by that is there was probably a lot of feedback. Quite frankly, even I had the feedback of original Metal Gears where I was like, I wish that I just knew what to do. I feel like I have to look everything up. Yeah. And so what does the developer do? The developer goes, okay, here's everything you need to do so you don't have to look it up.
Here's a guy who's literally going to force you to listen to a Kodak conversation in which he will explain the boss mechanics in excruciating detail.
Yeah, exactly, right?
But it's a bit of an overcorrection, I think, is my criticism, yeah.
No, exactly, and I share your criticism that it's an overcorrection as well. But I think that now I understand better about why I liked and disliked the combat, and why I was very, like, frustrated by wanting to do it, was that some of the mechanics, like the first-person camera, I actually really loved the addition of the first-person camera shooting mechanics. The issue I had was that it was just so hard to aim.
It's faffy, because I feel like it's very faffy,
I don't think they had the time to really like polish it like in another, say, dedicated shooter.
Well, and that's
because
really
they had all of the other mechanics,
and that's and that's the drawback of having so many combat mechanics, is that like you run into the problems where like any individual one is not as refined as it could be. I don't think.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's kind of that really helps kind of sum up the kind of like the combat to it, is because what I really enjoyed about the combat was the first person camera. I really felt like I was a little more in depth. I felt like I was able to control the situations a lot clearer. Like when I wanted to shoot the spotlight, it took me forever to learn that actually. Yeah. But it was obvious that I needed to do it, but I wasn't quite sure how. And so I actually spent way longer in that fight than I think was originally intended. Yeah. That being said, I'm glad they didn't just tell me like shoot out the spotlight. Like at least I felt in the tanker prologue like it was really clear.
Yeah, you just see him do it, and then it sort of gives you the idea.
Yeah, you kind of just see it, it gives you the idea. Well, but I would say that in future kind of levels, I do feel like at times there were some kind of like fights right between the dialogue and what was necessary in the level versus what I wanted to do as a player. But at the same time, we saw that in earlier Metal Gears. So for me, like the combat, it's really hard to rate this on our hex plot, because what we normally do, everyone, is also rate these things on a kind of a Likert scale, a 1 to 7 rating, with 7 being saying you can't avoid combat. Combat is a really, really high thing. And then say 1 being say no combat. Now, in an action game, you're not going to get a no combat experience, right? And or combat is not going to be unimportant. But for this game, it's really hard for me to rate this on a 1 to 7 because I felt like combat, like the whole game is about combat. And obviously now knowing that there's a katana fight at the end, it's just like frustrating because there's just so much of it. But I feel like if I rate it high on the combat scale, am I saying, what is the judgment of that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I maybe we should just avoid doing like the numerical thing that we normally do, precisely because I just wanted this to be sort of like a structure for like broader issues. And so the thing is, like, to me, like, this game actually doesn't feel very combat focused. So like to move on to sort of the question of like the cinematic qualities of this game, like, to me in many ways, well, and it's not just okay. So, like,
I just want to interject.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to interrupt. I want to interject super quickly, just to say that I actually do think that the numbers are important, but I do think maybe we can do it at the end, because what I'm realizing is that since this is the episode in which we're doing it in live time, I would absolutely agree now that the cinema of this is way more vastly important than the combat. And I think that having the discussion about the cinema, the lore, the camp, all of the psychodrama that goes on is going to reflect and actually help the scoring. So let's do that first. Yeah, let's move into cinema.
I will say, though, that is my final point on the combat system. I think one of the reasons that makes it difficult to rate this one specifically is because of the fact that, like, previously we had thought of it as like a stealth combat like continuum. But in this game, stealth is turned into a combat mechanic. Whereas in the previous games, it really was fundamentally about avoiding combat rather than sort of like using stealth as like a form of combat. Because that's because that's what the M9 does, is it turns stealth into a combat mechanic, I think.
Oh, I totally get that. I totally feel you. All right, into cinema though.
All right,
because
movies. Let's talk about movies.
Yeah. No, because movies, like, I absolutely, like, I'm going to go ahead and lead this one just right away so that I can see when you're going into this game. Like, I cannot tell you. I thought the first cutscene for Metal Gear Solid was long. I was wrong. And now I realize what people like joke about is that every game is just going to get longer. And I think that this is definitely the game where I went, oh, okay, I see it. I see now what you meant when I was reading The Creative Gene, and you were like, I'm a guy that just wanted to make movies. Yeah. And then you're like, but instead I'm making games and everybody wants me to make games. And I was like, no, I think people want you to make interactive movies.
Yeah, like, It's like I would like to actually push buttons occasionally.
Yeah, I would like to push buttons occasionally. And I think it's just so funny because it's like you're playing the action sequence of a movie. That's what this game kind of felt like to me.
Well, it's weird. It's interesting because, like, I would also say that I'm sort of like grouping into the cinematic category also the many, many long like codec conversations that you have throughout the game, because they feel like a cutscene insofar as like the interactivity is basically just like you could click through or you can just let it play through. So that's not, it's minimal at best. And so then for me personally, like the total structure of the game definitely had this feeling of like combat, sort of like encounters, be they combat or something else, were a way to kind of like string together what the real focus was, which is, on this dialogue and on these like really cinematic cutscenes. Because it's like Kojima, after making an extremely successful game in the form of Metal Gear Solid, has been given a degree of latitude to make an almost like mannerist cinematic experience of a game. In other words, it's like rather than like there being cinematic elements, it's almost like you took a movie, you take an action movie, you carve it up, and then you use like interactive elements to sort of like bridge those like bits that you carved up, rather than sort of like using the cutscenes as. So in other words, the gameplay becomes the bridge rather than the cutscene becoming the bridge.
So exactly. And this is a really, really great point to kind of highlight something that we see around this era in the early 2000s, 2010s even, is where we have this dialectic or this dialogue and discourse around, are you a mechanics-driven game or are you a narrative-driven game? And I want you to know, in modern 2020 terms, and hopefully into the 2030s, we all hate this, okay? Because making a game should not be, are you going to try to tell a story or are you going to try to make a game? But games like Metal Gear Solid 2 really showcase Nicholas's kind of like points about how you created kind of a script, like a movie script, and then went, okay, where are we putting gameplay beats? And I think that this is something that people also can see in other really popular titles. Like, say you don't want to play this game, but you want to have a modern equivalent. I think this is incredibly true a lot of what people talk about when we talk about the Final Fantasy games, particularly the like ones that have numbers. Like they all have numbers. But
except for the first one, they all have numbers.
Except for the first one, they all have numbers. Excuse me. But particularly the like single player campaigns is what I mean.
Yeah.
Such as say like Final Fantasy 15, Final Fantasy 16, probably Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 13, right? Kind of have the most, is what I would say, of like kind of that linear, narrative story with a ton of characters, with a lot of backstory, tons of lore dumps.
13 especially with its like several parts.
13 with its several parts. And the reason why I'm bringing up kind of the Final Fantasy kind of like RPG is that I don't think people would say Final Fantasy 13 was built in the same way as this game. And I think it largely is attributed to the amount of cinematography, the camera cuts especially, the angles, the different types of movements, as well as the use of the gameplay camera in order to kind of loop into the cinematic experience. I think this feels more of like a movie because it has that linear, I don't want to say a linear beginning, middle, and end, but almost it doesn't have quite an act structure so much as it does have like one giant movie plot, if that movie was 9 hours long, and you broke it up with, and this is where he infiltrates, and he infiltrates equals 10 or 20 minutes of gameplay, and then you see the story, right? Versus Final Fantasy 13 had not only, you could say like skill trees and a robust like skill system. I mean, it's an RPG, but I would say Final Fantasy 13 was more about like a collection of people fighting against a world evil, and you could tell that the gameplay was made and then almost like, okay, well, where do we string along these different levels? How do we connect all of these ideas together? But it was still, I would say, a narrative-driven experience. Like Final Fantasy games are all about the story.
Well, but that's the thing. That's the thing is that I know you didn't get like all the way to the end of the game, so you actually don't realize how apt your RPG comparison is, because much of the final, say, I don't know, hour of the game is about this almost like meta take on how Metal Gear Solid 2 is essentially a pastiche of Metal Gear Solid, and that like Snake is like a role in a role-playing game. And like, in fact, I literally at one point think that the Patriots actually call it a role-playing game rather than, what is it? Tactical espionage or whatever the heck it is.
My jet lag was killing me. So I was like awake at weird hours, not awake at other hours.
So that's the thing is that like role-playing games are kind of in the background. I mean, even though this game itself really isn't one, conceptually, it's sort of like drawing from that design ethos where it's like, and I think that actually will then bring us into sort of like the lore category really nicely, because if anything, like the classic like Japanese, I'm not going to say JRPG, that's not a thing. We did an entire episode about it. The classic like Japanese version of like the sort of like Western imported role-playing game is one in which it is like almost story, like it's story explosion. Like it's just so much story, and they're so long. And the fact that like this particular game really sort of like goes in, like if Metal Gear Solid was sort of like a wink at what the Metal Gear lore is going to become, this game is like, let me tell you about everything in the universe. I mean, I think it's actually at times to the game's detriment, but it's definitely a choice. This game chose to like make sure that you know everything about like the political situation, everything about like Raiden's like violent past, like everything about this weird shadowy group that maybe isn't actually real people called the Patriots, like more stuff about Ocelot, more stuff about Liquid, more stuff about Solid Snake, and then a whole bunch of like secondary characters who each have their own lore dumps just before they die. Like this game very much wants to sort of like give you as much Metal Gear as it possibly can. And when I say as much Metal Gear, I mean as much Metal Gear information.
Yes. And okay, I have to build off of that because there's a couple of things I have. like noted of. My first note was that when I started getting the lore dumps, and this is my bias, is you know me, my name is Lauryn, I'm here for the lore. And I mean, I was down for it. Okay, I have been watching so many Chinese dramas set in, you know, the different like dynasty periods, and I have been seeing so many like K-dramas. Like I'm just like all about ancient past. I love history, right? That's why Nicholas and I get along so well, because we love digging up really esoteric facts about seemingly weird details. That's how we found the game design document. Yeah. I mean, like we're all in it, okay? I really liked it. Like I liked learning about all of these different things. I actually played a lot of visual novels as a kid, so it's no surprise that I'm going into this game and I had just kind of been reading a bunch of visual novels where you basically just click through, right? Like I'm an avid reader of books as well, everyone. Those things with pages and no pictures. But I'm playing this and I'm almost playing it like a visual novel. Like every single freaking
that makes sense.
codec thing, I did not listen to the VO. I'm so sorry, actors, because some of it was really funny when I did like play it on pause and listen. But because of the amount of lore in this game, I really feel like I understand when gamers of the past age were like, I could play a game all day and like never get bored. And I don't think that's true. I think you were bored, but you let it go on autopilot and you picked up a book or you looked at your phone, because there were smartphones at that time. Okay, everybody, 2001 is old, but we all still had phones. Okay, the iPhone was about to come out in a few years, but let's just, people still had Blackberries. You could still text. Texting was a thing. I think texting was a thing then. But TLDR, right? Doesn't matter. You're playing this game, and all I'm trying to say is like I left it running. Or if I leave it running and I'm listening to it, I'm reading these dialogue entries. I was really, really invested in just like reading everything. And I felt like I could understand, even if I didn't get it and I skimmed the information, like I was like, okay, it's really nice to know what's going on in this universe.
Yeah.
That's what I really liked about it. Like I really liked reading all of that. But on the flip side, I was like, my gosh, like this game is just a book. Like it's a novel. Like I am reading it.
Yeah, you do. Like even when there is voiceover, you do feel like you're reading it. Because, you know, obviously like the text of the dialogue is on the screen at the same time. But to me, where it kind of goes overboard is that like it starts to override. So broadly speaking, what ends up happening is that this ends up becoming a game where it doesn't so much show you what it's about as in it like tells you what it's about. And this is sort of like a classic problem in creative writing where, you know, if you go to an MFA program, you'll get this sort of like very basic bitch advice of like, you should show, not tell. And it's like, okay, there are actually situations in which telling is just equally as valid. But the problem here is that, like, it's out of balance, where, like, things that really could have been shown to you through gameplay just become something that you're told. And as a result, I feel like characterization really then sort of slides as a result, because who characters are isn't so much a function of, like, how you're interacting with them throughout the game as the really long monologue they give just before they die.
It's the just before they die part that really like just kind of like twisted the knife in me, because I felt like if you're going to really tell me about this, I would really I felt like it needed to come before or after. Right?
Yeah.
And I think the reason why I say that is that I'm just watching this Chinese drama, and that's kind of premiering on Netflix. It's not really premiering. It's been around for like weeks, guys, but I'm behind. And every time someone dies, you have no idea who they are or why. But then through the investigation, right, you kind of figure it out.
Yeah.
So I almost feel like a situation that we're going to see in either, I hope we see in future titles, or things that we kind of saw in past titles, is like once you kill someone, you have no idea who they are. And then only after do you kind of go, oh, that's the person that did this. Or through context clues, do you kind of piece it together? And I feel it's that era of mystery that's kind of missing from this game. And I think that's why it's interesting to talk about how this game has a lot of lore, and it also has a story, but it's that like info dump lore that kind of makes it feel more overwhelming and also more confusing. Like, why are all of these facts important?
Yeah.
And what do they actually matter to, like, say, the overarching narrative or story? And I think that's my disconnect, is that most of the lore was really nice to know, but you didn't need it.
Well, then I think that's actually a really good segue to talking about. I mean, I know I have camp next on the show notes, but I actually kind of want to talk about another one of our factors, which is psychodrama, which is sort of like the way in which like the psychological tension between characters, often between like father types and son types, like, and also like brother types and sister types, gets worked out throughout the game, precisely because like there are a number of moments when like a concept is introduced, but it doesn't really get developed. Like, for example, a good potential like thematic thread for the game would have been like, so for example, the character Fortune, she blames Snake for the death of her father, who was the colonel in the prologue chapter on the tanker. And like that doesn't really get a chance to be developed. She just kind of says like, "Oh, I was dead. I was convinced you killed my dad, and now I'm so mad at you, and you've taken everything from me, and I'm so mad." And then it just kind of gets dropped when she dies later, protecting them. Like and because the thing is, like, there's something to be said there about the way in which like violence functions in these games, and sort of like the collateral effect of the violence that a character like Snake perpetrates in the world, and how people can react to that. Like, it is actually something that, for example, for all of their faults, the Last of Us games do pretty well, is understanding like the ramifications of violence, the cycle of violence. This game doesn't seem to think the cycle of violence even exists. And if it does, I don't know where that is in the game, to be perfectly honest. Or like another really interesting thing that gets introduced is the idea that like Snake isn't so much a specific character, Solid Snake, as a kind of like subject position within this world of violence, and actually one that can be reproduced. In fact, at the very beginning of the game, when you're first introduced to Raiden, his code name is Snake. And you will later learn that that's very intentional, because when the Patriots are talking about how like Raiden was brainwashed and made to be like Solid Snake so that he could do this thing for them, to be essentially be their like unwitting agent against Solidus, then you realize that it's like, oh no, what Snake is this kind of almost like, to get a little bit too abstract and theoretical for you, like an almost like Althusserian like interpellation, where who you are is a function of like how circumstances are constraining and causing you to be a particular kind of person, like a role in a role-playing game. That's actually where that whole thing is brought back in. And like, that's another interesting thread that could have been developed. Is it? No. So like, unfortunately, it's not.
Yeah, I don't have anything really to add to Nicholas's points here, other than the psychodrama in this game for me is off the charts. Like, every single twist and turn about like the subject positioning, and we did like kind of, I said we, but really Nicholas wrote a book on like subjectivity in video games, and like the first person subjective. Yeah. And I think that like when I'm rereading that and I'm thinking about this title and I'm thinking about the first person camera, it really feels like the psychodrama is off the charts in somewhat so many ways. And then it feels like it falls down when they do try to over explain everything that's happening.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And so it's been very interesting, but I would say that the psychodrama has to be off the charts simply because of that simulation, that subject positioning of you are only Snake, you were bred, but basically, right, born and then bred this way through through nurturing you to become a snake, right? To become an infiltrator. And then you go, oh, to become a snake. Wait, a snake is an infiltrator. It's, a wrongdoer? Wait, is it evil? Because snakes are now the Garden of Eden. Like, it makes you as the user player, right, or at least me, right, very interested in this kind of stuff. Like, completely, right, going through loops and loops and loops. And then the game itself almost goes through loops and loops, right? Because you're trying to break free of the cycle, but then you can't break free. And so to counter your point about how the game doesn't talk about how it's breaking the cycle of violence, I feel this does come down to what you said on the argument of Raiden's own subjectivity. Like, he doesn't understand or know that he's perpetuating a cycle of violence.
Well, it's weird. Sometimes he does and sometimes he doesn't. Like, it's not consistent.
Yeah. I you know what? I do think it's very inconsistent. So I will give that to you as well. Yeah. But I do think that he and himself into Tal does not, is like, I have to be violent in order to break the cycle of violence. And I think that's the contradiction. And I think that's why so much of the gameplay plays the way it does.
Yeah.
Is because while on the one hand you are kind of, at first, right, kind of infiltrating and thinking that you are doing something good, you learn that it's bad. And it just kind of continues that way. And I think for a lot of players, it's very easy to get lost in the amount of psychodrama and lore, particularly if you aren't realizing that Escape from New York is your role model cinematic experience here. Because quite frankly, I mean, a lot of that journey really just felt like you're going to play Escape from New York now. And well, I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Well, but actually, then this is a good time to segue back to like the question of camp in this game.
Yeah, and we should segue back into camp and Dudes Rock, because for me, I think that's what helped, I don't know, lighten the mood.
Yeah, definitely. So like I have to admit, even my cynical self, like I found the characters, even if they were shallow, to be very fun. Like the character who is named Vamp is literally a vampire, but also apparently a flamenco dancer, and he's got his shirt off. So actually we should kind of combine camp and Dudes Rock, because I want to be very clear, this game is super gay. May not have intended to be super gay, but oh my god, does it love guys. And when I say it loves guys, I don't mean loves guys in the sense like, oh man, I love you, bro. Like, no, it loves men's bodies. It loves men's hair. It loves men's butts. It loves men moving and dancing and being seductive and attractive. Like, they really should just kiss already. And like Vamp is a really good example of this, because like, you know, if you think about vampires in the way in which they were sort of like a literary trope, they were sort of this figure of like seduction as violence. And Vamp as a character in this game is like seductive and violent. And in a way that's fun and campy, but also in a way that like is menacing and kind of like a Dracula figure, where it's like he's meant to be sensuous, but at the same time also very dangerous. And like, I think that's kind of true of all of the characters here, where like even Solid Snake, good old fashioned Solid Snake, our boy, like even he has a kind of sensuous quality to him, not just because you get to see his butt all the time, but also because he is kind of catty in this game. In other words, he has a bit more personality, and he's not constantly like being a misogynist. And for me, it really is one of the few redeeming qualities. The way in which Kojima seems to love guys, and love guys in a way that maybe even he doesn't recognize and understand. But I see you, Kojima.
I see you. We see through you.
I see you, my bisexual king. I acknowledge you. You are valid. Sorry.
I mean, I'm laughing. No. I'm laughing because I was like, okay, Lauryn, you need to interject. And then I started looking at pictures of Vamp. Then I was like, I don't need to interject. Everything's fine.
It's like, wait, well, actually, he's correct.
I mean, no, I was just going to interject and like build off of it. But I mean, honestly, there's nothing to build. Vamp is great. I think what's great about vamping on Vamp is that he really does kind of like take a kind of a divisive thing, I would say, for like potentially gamers. Because what I would note is that I think a lot of the time, like the boss battle is just so difficult and challenging.
Oh yeah.
And I think that like because of that, right? So mechanically, it's like, oh, like you're so hard to beat, you're so hard to like grab, you're dodging, you're like, I don't know how to like, you know. You're not like, I'm not able to hit you.
Because he's a version of the teleport fight that you see in a lot of Metal Gear games, and those are always annoying. And
they're always annoying, right? Yeah. But I think combined with like this character art, it kind of pushes it forward in a way that I think like is demonstrating more of the characterization, and it is very campy. It's like, look, if you have a character that's going to be hard to evade, like even if you look at pictures of Vamp, by the way, for everyone who is potentially kind of on the move, or you're doing a workout, or you're commuting to work and you're listening to the Furudashi podcast.
Or if you're just into guys, if you're really into guys, he's a great
Or you're
kind of
into
guy.
guys,
yeah.
You know, or you're into, fashion and or cosplay or anything. Go look up Vamp. But what I'm saying is you have to be at a computer. Please don't like use your phone and drive and or like run with your phone trying to look up pictures of this guy, because you'll stop. And I think that like looking at his positioning, like his animation pose is like super, super critical, I think, to understanding what we're talking about here with kind of dudes rock and like camp, is that from the campy perspective, he's a really goofy kind of like teleport fight or character or like conception this guy exists in the Metal Gear universe. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, because there's a weird way in which like it's meant to be sort of like super serious and about the military, and you have guns and they're all very specific, and there's vampires
who are, you know, knife wielders and they throw vampires. Stuff and they're sexy.
And Astarion is in the game.
Yeah, like I think that's what we're trying to get at with the camp. Now, we're combining this with dude rock, I think, is really, really great, because at the end of the day, like, what dude doesn't want to be a hot and sexy vampire that can slink around like a cat and throw knives, okay? I know you're all out there. I know you all in middle school, you little fedora boys, and you were all trying to wield your like shurikens and your throwing stars and your knives and your daggers to like hit the target. Like, I see you, I get you, I hosted anime cons for you, okay? Thank you for coming. We really appreciate your feedback. Please stop wearing the fedora. And I think that like it's just one of those things.
No, incorrect. You can wear whatever whatever hat you want to. I see you. You're valid. Lauryn, no.
Lauryn is canceled.
Lauryn is
canceled.
Canceled.
I actually own like 2 fedoras, so like it's fine. But like I see you. If you are still a valid human, it's okay. You're all there. I am joking. Thank you, Nicholas. I think for me,
do be careful with the shurikens. You will hurt yourself.
Oh yes, but be careful with shurikens. Okay, you're gonna hurt yourself.
Yeah.
But the point of the joke, right, is that like, come on, like I want to learn how to throw daggers. Like I definitely have been throwing axes before. Like throwing axes is cool. Throwing knives are cool. Okay, and that's what dudes rock means, right? It's like, dude, you rock. Right? I know that's like a dumb explanation of dudes rock, Nicholas. I'm sorry, forgive me.
Yeah.
But I do think that like being able to kind of go through and like hyperbolize, right, different elements of dudes rock and camp, which is like a hyperbole, right? It's kind of making fun of itself and using that as a way to actually be dramatic is really seen in this boss in a way that the other bosses and more militaristic examples just really didn't do. And so it's really actually nice to see this in this game.
Well, and sort of like as a way to close things out, I think ultimately my final criticism is that any one of these ideas that we have like brought up and dropped in much the same way that the game brings up and drop, like if they had been more polished, if they had been more developed, if like the game had spent more time, like actually discarded some of them and just like dwelt with some of these things at length, rather than using them sort of like momentarily only to then move on to something else. That it reflects, you know, Kojima is a brilliant designer at times, he's a very frustrating designer at times. And for me, this game exhibits a lot of his more frustrating tendencies. And I wish that weren't the case, because it's like so often there is the germ of a really incredible idea that, especially in 2001, would have been just like monumental. And I have to acknowledge the fact that yes, this was a really well-received game. People still really love it. But to me, it ultimately falls short because, well, frankly, it can't commit to the bit. I feel like the other Metal Gear games that we have played were always willing to commit to their respective bits. Whereas this game is trying so hard to be so many things that at the end of the day, it doesn't quite, like, it's not, it's weird. It's a game that's almost like less than the sum of its parts. Like, if you experience the game as its individual parts, you're going to have a really great time. But if you're going to go into it thinking like, okay, what does that all add up to? I don't know. I think you're going to be left with a question that you can't really answer.
Yeah, and then for me to close it out, I just want to remind you guys that, I actually think this game is a little bit higher up on the charts. I do want to go through kind of like our hex plot and just say that here's my rankings really quickly, because this is what we would do on the Patreon episode.
Yeah.
And then, by the way, if you are still listening here, please go to our Patreon episode and actually listen to the game design document analysis for this game and why it was actually marketed to people like me, those who have been born female into our universe. Here's my really quick hex plot. So I would actually say that combat is, interestingly, I would say at about a 5. I think that I'm even so much so as to go into a 4 because I felt like combat was really just an action sequence in a 7 cinematic experience of this game. It really was more of a movie. Also, lore has to be at a 7.5, an 8, a 9. I mean, it's off the charts.
A 23, I believe. A 23 out of 7.
A 23 out of 7, right?
Yeah.
Now, I am going to combine camp and Dudes Rock lightly to where we did it. I do think there are more Dudes Rock elements in other game examples, and I do think that this game is very campy, but because of its lore, it actually makes it more tonally serious. So for me, camp and Dudes Rock are sitting at about a 5 or a 6. Camp probably respectively at a kind of 5. Dudes Rock also, I think, at a 5. And then the psychodrama is going to be just a nice round 7. That means that psychodrama...
You think psychodrama is high? I would put psychodrama low. I would say it's like a 2.
You would think it's a 2? Okay.
Yeah, precisely because it's not fleshed out. Yeah.
This is a great example then for you guys to go into our comments of this episode, whether we post it on YouTube, or please reach out to us on Blue Sky. I'm at Espresso Cat. We have at Academicality. Please talk to us when we post this as well, or slide into our DMs just to talk about like psychodrama, right? I think that it's incredibly high because it's not fleshed out, but it's all there and you're felt as a player with it. But Nicholas is saying, hey, I think it's a 2 because it's not really explored. So we'd love to hear your thoughts over there. And until then, we'll see you next time on our Patreon episode where we actually get to dissect a Kojima Dating Dine document. See you there.